Our next speaker is my colleague Dr. Rory Hearne, and Rory is the organiser of today's conference, and he's one of Ireland's leading experts on issues of housing, housing inequality and housing justice. So if you could welcome Rory again.
Thanks, Seamus, and thanks everyone for coming along today. I really appreciate it. It's great to see so many people here and engaged, and particularly I think Patricia and Peter have really set out, I think, an agenda for housing, and it is really so welcome to see, Patricia, the Irish Congress of Trade Unions, specifically calling for a referendum on the right to housing, and it is because it is fundamental. The change that's needed is fundamental, and I have it in my slides in terms of the need for that referendum, but I will talk because it flows directly from it. That I think that if we look at the virus at the moment, the COVID-19 virus, and I put up slides earlier, and I'll stick them up again in terms of the emergency responses needed, but I think it contextualizes it because we do have over 10,000 people in emergency accommodation in this country who are extremely vulnerable to the virus. We also have tens of thousands of people who are couch surfing, who are sofa surfing, who are living in insecure housing, and many tens of thousands more, which we heard about earlier today, who are living in substandard accommodation, who are living with mould, with dampness, who can't afford to heat their homes. All of this puts these people at huge risk. And in a way then we can see, it shows up so starkly, the fundamental role that housing plays in our well-being. And this has been the huge mistake that policy has made in this country over the last 3 decades, which has been the shift from viewing housing as much as it was prior to the 1980s, but it was seen as something that the state had a key role in providing for people, to becoming this marketized commodity, essentially this investment asset, which was the main purpose of housing. And we are seeing now so many people, tens of thousands of people, are more at risk today from this virus because of our approach to housing over the last 3 decades. Tens of thousands of people are in a less position to recover and to be protected because of this. So I think it really does show up the impact of our housing and the approach to it. And I do think, and I've put out this call and I will be arguing it for more in the coming weeks, is that we do need a prioritisation to empty our emergency accommodation in terms of putting people into homes, and that needs to be an emergency focus. We're going to have a lot of emergency focuses within the response to this virus, but I do believe the people who are in emergency accommodation, who are in severe risk, need to be prioritised for housing allocation in the coming weeks and months. There is a huge amount of vacant property, as we've seen in this country, with proper investment, local authorities can be funded, and housing associations, to provide homes for the 10,000 individuals and families. I think this needs to be a priority. It also, there is a need, as I said, to stem the flow into homelessness. There needs to be an immediate legislation introduced that halts eviction in the private rental sector. That is quite a significant measure, but I believe it is required. There's hundreds of families been put into homelessness every month. This flow needs to be stopped, and we also need rents to be frozen. We are in emergency situation. This is the time for emergency responses and where we can help people. I mentioned also the need for fuel allowances to be extended in terms of people not cutting back their home. And as I said there, the lesson that if people have a decent standard home, we are in a much better place to prevent the spread of these viruses, because there will be future viruses, there will be future economic shocks. We need to put housing central to providing a protective society that ensures our citizens are protected against the market inequalities, against the health issues that are going to come ahead, against the climate change, and against financial instability, which does lie ahead. And in terms of that, ensuring that, we cannot repeat the austerity mistake, and not just mistake, but policy. We cannot repeat the austerity policies that devastated the social housing budgets between 2008 and 2015. There will be, no doubt, a huge debate after this COVID virus has passed, come May, June, that budgets need to be cut back because of the response that was put into the money put into COVID. Social housing cannot be cut. We need the opposite. We need investment to be increased, so we cannot make the mistakes of austerity, and the social housing budget and affordable budget should be expanded as a lesson to be learned from COVID-19, that the state needs to invest in our homes to protect citizens for the future. I put out that slide, I was doing it last night because I had initially done my slides, which was essentially making the case that, and it's accepted broadly, the social consensus, even though the government is still, current caretaker government is still acting as if this isn't the case. Rebuilding Ireland, the government's housing plan, was a failure. It was fundamentally flawed. And if we look at the election, 80% of people voted, 80% of those who voted for parties who said rebuilding Ireland was flawed, was failed, and they needed alternative policies. There needs to be an immediate acceptance by government, and the new government that comes in place. Rebuilding Ireland needs to be scrapped, and we need to start again with a new vision and new principles for a new housing plan for Ireland that is built around what the other speakers talked about, which is the right to housing. And as Peter, made the point so eloquently, and others have done, that the right to housing was not only not prioritised in Rebuilding Ireland, it wasn't mentioned once in our National Housing Plan. It needs to be the cornerstone of our National Housing Plan, ensuring the right to affordable, secure, adequate housing is available for everybody in this country. So that is what is needed. We need a new plan. I've set it out in my book, which is going to be published in June, which is called Housing Shock, the Irish Housing Crisis and How to Solve It, with a foreword from the UN Rapporteur. And it sets out an idea, a plan and principles for what should be in that new plan. As I spoke about, the reason why we're in this crisis is because of the commodification and market dominance of housing. And we need this referendum. We absolutely need the referendum to put the right to housing into constitutional law, because we need a national conversation about how we view housing. We in this room broadly would all agree with this idea of what we're talking about here, but there is still a portion of the population out there who think, and they're not quite sure, is housing a human right? Is it an investment? And I think that the consensus is that it is a social good, it should be a human right. But we need to have that discussion, and a referendum would provide that opportunity. And people will say a referendum won't build a single house. What's the point in doing it? Well, the point in doing it is we need to mark an end point. We need to mark an end point to say this crisis has gone too far, we are going no further, that every government that comes into place into the future is obliged to ensure that there is not one child, family, individual homeless in this country. There is no reason why we can't do that. And I was struck by Leilani Farah when she spoke at the Housing Committee, when she asked the question, why would a government not want to achieve that? Why would you not want to be proud to have the right to housing in your law and your constitution and to be fulfilling that? And to me, that seems an obvious thing, that we do need to become a country that is proud that we have everybody housed adequately and affordably. And I believe that, and we know that the opinion poll from the Irish Human Rights Commission, which was commissioned in 2018, showed that a majority of the public are in favour of this. They're in favour of a right to housing to be inserted in the Constitution. Now is the time to do this, and I'm part of the Raise the Roof coalition, which is advocating for this, and also Home for Good, which is a coalition of NGOs which is advocating for the right to housing to be put into the Constitution and a referendum. We also need a roadmap to end homelessness within Ireland within the next 5 years. Rebuilding Ireland did not set out to end homelessness. It had no ambition to end homelessness. What it talked about was an ambition to reduce homelessness. We need to aim to end homelessness, and following the Finland's housing first approach, which is homes plus support services, and we should aim to close all family hubs within 12 months, I would argue. They are institutionalising another generation of our children and mothers and families, and this is absolutely unacceptable that this is taking place. And we do need to make the private rental sector a home in terms of providing legislation for long-term tenant security through removing the eviction clauses. They need to be removed, and providing for things like 25-year leases. New public housing, we've talked about it a lot today. It's clear we need to make the shift to a new approach to public housing. It needs to be available, like it is in Austria, like it is in Denmark, for anybody on any income. And that's straight up. We need to ensure that they're excellently designed, lifetime, affordable and secure homes. And I do believe we need to set up a home building agency to work with local authorities, housing associations and cooperatives to deliver this. We need a Green New Deal for housing. We also need to halt the speculative financialisation of our housing. The government has celebrated the increase in supply from the cuckoo funds and the build-to-rent sector and actively facilitated them. I think we need to do the opposite. We need to rescind the real estate investment tax break. We need to impose higher taxes on these funds. The regulations on small apartment sizes and facilitating co-living need to be reversed. We need to actually halt the role of real estate investors and large funds in our housing system, at least on a temporary basis, in order to cool down house prices and allow people actually be able to buy a home and avoid what is happening, which is these investment funds are embedding a permanent unaffordability into our housing system. They are buying up these properties to rent them at a huge rent into perpetuity. There is a new social consensus for a radical shift in housing policy. I think the government has to bring all stakeholders in. There has to be some form of not just a commission, but I think a housing, we can call a housing consultative forum, where all the people in this room, where all the different stakeholders are in there and are forming the new housing policy. From business to trade unions, to campaigning groups, to homeless NGOs, to the homeless themselves, to those who are affected by the crisis, need to be in there making this policy together. And to finish, I think we need to continue the social pressure. The protests will have to continue, inevitably, if we are to make sure that the agenda that is there, that's set out, the consensus, is turned into reality. My biggest fear is we will see promises and spin that dissipates the desire for real change on housing, and we end up in the same situation for the next 10, 20, 30 years. I do think we need another mobilisation by Raise the Roof that obviously when all this COVID-19 is over, that shows that the impulse for change is there, and the impulse for the referendum and for this new approach to housing. I do feel, like Peter said, very hopeful actually, that we are in a time for housing to eventually become a human right and delivered for everybody in this country. It's time we have to do it, and I'll leave it there. Thank you, Seamus.